We are in the final week of our Made for Mission series, and I think it's been, I have enjoyed it. I don't know if you have enjoyed it, but over the past 5 weeks, we have talked about how we are all called by God to join in His mission to reach the world. We've talked about what we're supposed to say, who we're supposed to say it to, and then why should we even live on mission to begin with. And so, little side note, this is my shameless plug for our sermons being online. If you missed a week, or you know you're going to be gone and you just can't live a day without listening to my amazing voice, you can go to our church website, rockwellcitychurch.org, and we put our sermons up online. So if you missed a week, and you would like to go back and watch it, or in the future, knowing that we not every week, but we try to most weeks to get the sermon online. If you happen to miss it for some reason, you can go back and watch them. I was told this week by one of my previous youth group kids. She called me and said, "I watched your sermon yesterday," and I'm like, "Why?" And so it's a cool resource that I hope people can take a part of, and would encourage you if you miss a week. But moving on, today we're going to be studying the scene in the life of a guy named Peter. I had an old preacher tell me once that we will know who Peter is when we get to heaven because he's the guy with the foot-shaped mouth. So Peter was one of those guys that open mouth, shove foot in kind of guys. He was always getting in trouble for speaking before thinking. And if you've ever done that before, then you might relate to Peter a little bit. Or if you've ever made a bonehead mistake, Peter is your guy. We're going to read 2 back-to-back stories that are found in the book of Luke that just share a little bit into Jesus and Peter's ministry. And so if you turn with me to Luke chapter 8, starting in verse 40, we're going to be looking at the story of Jesus raising a dead girl and healing a sick woman. And so Luke chapter 8, verse 40 through 42 is where we'll begin. "Now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. When a man named Jairus, the synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. So Jairus meets Jesus and his disciples at the docks. If you read before this, they're just coming back to the area from one of their excursions, and his description of this guy is that he's a synagogue leader. Now that's kind of a big deal because in that culture, think city council member or even like the mayor of the area. This is a guy who has influence. And this could be really big opportunity for this small startup movement led by Jesus. That if this synagogue leader were to become a follower, he had the potential of an influencing the whole city or even the surrounding region. You see, so often in the church we love to take advantage of celebrities' influence to spread the gospel, but I don't know as if that's normally how God works. He chooses to work. Often God chooses to use ordinary people to do extraordinary things. So I don't know quite what Jesus is thinking here, but I bet his disciples are not blind to this opportunity. They often got worldly ideas in their heads that it's like, if we could win this one guy, think of the impact of this area. And so they kind of, I'm guessing, are hurrying Jesus along to get to Jairus' house as fast as they could so that they don't miss out on this opportunity. But check out what happens next. It started kind of picking up there at the end of verse 42 and going through 48. It says, "As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. And a woman who was there, who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. 'Who touched me?' Jesus asked. And when they all denied it, Peter said, 'Master, the people are crowding and pressuring against you.' But Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. And in the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." And it's almost comical how this scene starts. This massive crowd is surrounding Jesus, pressing in closer and closer, and yet he stops mid-stride and says, "Who touched me?" And I can just picture the eye roll that Peter gave him, like, "Seriously, Jesus? Did not notice the crowd of people here? You're getting touched by everybody. Everybody is touching you." It'd be like being in a mosh pit at a rock concert and stopping and go, "Who touched me? Who touched me?" It makes no sense. What also makes no sense is that Jesus stops on his way to this big ministry opportunity to talk to, again, someone that everyone else ignored. And there are a lot of things that we could probably guess about this woman. She's poor. In the Gospel of Mark, we read that she spent all of her money trying to find a cure, and nothing has worked. She's probably all alone because we're not sure, but we don't hear of anyone else with her in this scene. And she's probably been seriously shamed in this city. The religious leaders taught that if you had a disease, especially a disease that was with you for over a decade, that was punishment from God, and therefore this was a person that you should stay away from. And still, with all of that baggage, she takes this massive risk. Because you see, based on Old Testament law, this woman's disease would have made her permanently unclean. She would have never been able to go to the temple. She would have never been able to approach a religious leader. And anything that she touched would become unclean as well, according to Old Testament law. You see, people know this about this woman. She has a reputation. So I'm just picturing that as she's pushing her way through the crowd to get to Jesus, what she had to endure. What are you doing here? Like, go home where you belong. She's shoved aside, given dirty looks, and yet in all of this woman relentlessly gets to Jesus. And it pays off. Her whole life is changed in a moment. We have no idea what God wants to use us for. And our greatest impact will probably come at a moment when we least expect it. See, for this woman, she had been suffering with this disease for 12 years. She had prayed to God to remove it, I'm sure probably multiple times a day for a decade. Women, you don't like it once a month. This woman dealt with it for 12 years non-stop. So what do we learn from this? If we walked in here and you've been carrying around this prayer request that seems like forever, maybe learn a lesson from this woman. Don't give up. Run to Jesus. There is always hope, and He can do more in a moment than we can do in a lifetime. So moving on in the story, starting in verse 49, we carry on with the story. It says, while Jesus was still speaking, someone from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader, came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, he said. Don't bother the teacher anymore. Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, don't be afraid, just believe, she will be healed. And when he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in except for Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. While all the other people were wailing and mourning. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. Stop wailing, Jesus said, she is dead. She is not dead, but asleep. They laughed at him, knowing that she was dead, but he took her by the hand and said, my child, get up. And her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat, and her parents were astonished. But he ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened. So they get to Jairus' place, and the daughter is already dead. And I can picture some of the disciples like shaking their heads going, Jesus, if we hadn't stopped along the way, we would have made it in time. You had to stop, didn't you? You know, Jesus, but what's cool is Jesus grabs a couple of the guys and this girl's parents, and they go up to this dead girl's bedroom. And he says to him, she's just sleeping. Now, probably out of pain, but the parents and his disciples and others close to the family, I just imagine this nervous chuckle, like, you do know what death is, right? Like, when you're dead, you're dead. But Jesus ignores their apparent lack of faith, and he grabs the girl's hand and he raises her from the dead. Think about this girl's life. What a story for her to share. Think about her parents. The synagogue leader of the area probably just became Jesus' follower in that moment. Yet, how old is this girl? She's 12 years old. And how long did this woman suffer from bleeding? 12 years. So how cool is it to think that God has been waiting for this amazing day for 12 years? How many of our prayer requests have God already picked the day that He's going to answer it, and He's just eagerly waiting to see the look on your face when He does? And I've read these two stories before numerous times, but honestly, I think I've missed the most impactful part of this story. See, while Jesus is healing this woman and raising the little girl from the dead, they're huge events, but I don't think they were the most impactful part. And here it is. Look back at verse 51. And this is where I want to encourage you this morning. When he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. Why Peter? Peter just questioned Jesus in public a minute and a half ago. He hadn't learned at that point to stop talking back to Jesus, like, really, again, Peter? But Jesus brings them along into Jairus' house and goes, oh, she's just sleeping. Well, then Peter laughs at him. I mean, he doesn't get the point, yet Jesus brings him along with John and James. And I think this has kind of been the whole point of the series, but I want to end on this one huge truth. When we are on mission, we are to bring someone with us. Bring someone with you. So as you go and live on the mission you were made for, don't do it alone. Bring someone along for the ride. This may be probably the single greatest leadership lesson we can learn in life, in the life of Jesus. Jesus is the greatest leader of all time, yet he never wrote any books. He never held public office. He never went outside a small demographic area of the world. And he was only on the public scene for just over 3 years, dying at the age of 33. Yet here we are 2,000 years later, and there are over 2 billion people that follow Jesus all over in every corner of the earth in hundreds of different languages. So this movement that he started is growing faster now worldwide than ever before. Talk about good leadership. So bring someone with you. Do you know how many times it took how many times Jesus took his disciples with him when he went anywhere? You know, take a stab at the number of how many times Jesus brought someone with him in ministry. I don't either. I tried counting. I lost track. Probably, Jesus intentionally brought people with him. There's probably hundreds of times that you can read throughout the Gospels that Jesus brought either the 12 or the 3 with him. He was rarely ever alone. I mean, there were times that he was alone. Usually when he needed to go talk to God in prayer, you read that Jesus went off to pray in the garden alone, or Jesus went off to pray alone. And I'm going to guess he probably went to the bathroom alone. At least I hope he did. But evidence is abundantly clear that with incredible intentionality, Jesus almost always brought people with him. Now listen to the last words of Jesus in Matthew chapter 28, starting in verse 19. We've read this before, it's the Great Commission. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. See, in the Greek, that the literal translation in that is, as you go, make disciples. So fulfilling the Great Commission is not something that we go and do some other time or when it's convenient. It's a way of life to live now. You see, as you go to work, make disciples. As you go to school, make disciples. As you coach the football team or the basketball team, make disciples. As you read the bedtime story to your children, make disciples. As you teach, make disciples. As you serve, make disciples. You fill in the blank, whatever your blank is. As you, whatever, make disciples. But don't think you need to do it alone. Actually, in fact, never do it alone. Christianity was never meant to be a solo task. The one and only person that could have done it alone chose to have three guys, at minimum of 3 guys, but a lot of times the 12 with him. Who will you partner with? Think about the different applications of this command. One is definitely that as you go through life, intentionally share Jesus with the people you meet. To disciple them in their faith, help them grow in the relationship with God. But the other application that I don't think I've ever heard someone preach on, but I think it's pretty obvious as I read this, is you watch and you look at Jesus' life. Don't just disciple the people you meet along the way, but bring people along with you. And disciple them while you go through your day-to-day responsibilities. See, Jesus ends with promising that He will always be with us to the very end of the age. You see, if He's truly in the driver's seat of our lives, then it's not so much that we are bringing Him with us, more as that He is bringing us with Him. What he did for the disciples 2,000 years ago, He still wants to do in our lives today. As He disciples us now, He invites us to do the same with others. So what are some practical examples? Yeah, it's great to talk about, but what does that even look like? So parents, bring your kids with you. See, Ashley and I try to be very intentional that church time is family time. When ministry needs to happen, our kids share in that ministry with us. But it's not just ministry stuff either. Do stuff as a family. Life is more than just work, eat, sleep, work, eat, sleep, work, eat, sleep. Spend time doing things with your kids. Also, kids, bring your friends along. 3 words: Saturday night sleepovers. I mean, obviously, talk to the parents first, but bring them to church with you. Have a sleepover Saturday night and go to church in the morning. You ever realize that your family may be the closest thing to Jesus that your friends will ever get? Or another practical example is, as you serve in ministry, invite someone to serve with you. Would you like to try and be an usher or a greeter with me one time, or with one of the guys? Or maybe it would be being a helper in the kids' Bible classes on Sunday morning or Wednesday night. Bring someone with you. If you're in that area, grab somebody by the hand. This is not meant to be done alone. See, with friends and family, bring them with you as you just live out your faith. We talked about this over the past 6 weeks, is just do life with one another. As you are going and doing a service project, or for that matter, coaching your kids' Little League team, bring a friend along to coach with you. And just show how you react as a Christian in those situations when you really want to punch the umpire because he made a bad call. But how you react may be world a difference in someone's life when they realize that your hope is in Jesus, not in the fickle things of this world. So my guess is that none of this is surprising. Yeah, Dillon, we've heard this a billion times. You've been pounding on it for the last 6 weeks. And that makes sense to talk about it, but yet several studies have shown that the average churchgoer in America brings an average of 0 lost people to church with them in a given year. Yes, the number is actually so low that they had to round down to nobody. I think that's the reason why we normally don't bring someone with us, is probably the same reason that Jesus should have not brought Peter with him. It's just easier to do it on your own. I fully agree with that. You never know what's going to come out of loudmouth Peter. You know, who knows what he's going to say. Or maybe you just don't think they can handle it. A minute before, Jesus totally had blown it. Why do we think he's going to do any better this time? See, reality is there are two possible outcomes when you bring somebody with you. Either one, your assessment of them might be wrong. You invite someone to come with you on mission and you think they can't handle it, but actually there's way more to them than you ever thought possible. Or the other option is that you could be right. They failed. Okay? But God is probably going to use their failure to grow them. Anybody ever grown through a failure before? I think like every time. You know? It's actually the primary way that we grow anyways. For example, parents, our job is not to always protect our kids. You know, sometimes you just put the trampoline under them as they jump off the roof and let them learn the lesson the hard way. That's the hard part of parenting. I mean, not always. But sometimes you have to let others fail to let them grow. So what happens with Peter? Well, I think he gets it. Finally, he got it. Jesus raised from the dead, and even death is not an impossible barrier for Jesus, but if Jesus didn't bring him with him, then Peter would have never learned this lesson, and this future scene probably would have never happened. If you flip over to Acts chapter 9, we get to see a snippet of Peter later in life, Acts chapter 9, starting in verse 36. It said, in Joppa there was a disciple named Tabitha. In Greek her name is Dorcas. And she was always doing good and helping the poor. And about that time she became sick and died, and her body was washed, placed in an upstairs room. And Lydia was near Joppa. And so when the disciples heard that Peter was in Lydia, they sent 2 men to him, urging him, please come at once. Peter went with them, and when they arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room. All the widows stood around him crying and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was still with them. Peter sent them all out of the room, and then he got down on his knees and prayed. Turning toward the dead woman, he said, Tabitha, get up. And she opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He took her by the hand and helping her to her feet. Then she called for the believers, especially the widows, and presented her to them alive. And this became known all over Joppa, and many people believed in the Lord. You see, Peter heals Tabitha in kind of a strangely similar way that Jesus healed Jairus' daughter. See, many people came to believe in Jesus throughout Joppa simply because Jesus put up with loudmouth Peter and took him along. And for years, Jesus put up with Peter and brought him along. And yet, God is connecting the dots all along the way. We have no idea what God wants to do through us when He wants to do it. See, God's calling on your life is bigger than just you. So what is God calling you to? Who can you bring with you? Who in your life does not know God as you seek to pursue after God yourself? Who will you invite to pursue after Him with you? They may laugh, but don't worry, you're in good company. Jesus was laughed at too. And as we close, I want to introduce to you a phrase that I think is the perfect response to what we've been talking about for this whole past 6 weeks. And the phrase is, will you put your yes on the table? And when it comes to God, will you answer yes, maybe even before you know what the question is? And you may have somebody already in mind, and that's great, but you may not either. And I hope that your prayer in that case is, God, I don't know how, who, what, when, or where, but my yes is on the table. There are 7 tables around the room, and I've already been asked about them, but each one represents an area of life. There's one for family, there's one for friends, neighbors, work, school, extracurriculars, and church. This is what I want to do, and I strongly encourage you to participate in this, is I want you to pull the card that we placed in your bulletins, where there's a card that just says yes real big on the one side, and then on the other side, it looks strangely familiar to this one. It says yes, and then on the back it says my name and who's coming with me. And if you don't have one and you need extras, there's extras at the end of the pews. But we're going to play a song, and during that song, I would like you to put your name on the top line. And I want you to put who you're going to bring with you on the card. And as the song plays that we're going to play, I want you to go place it on the table that best represents that area of life you want to be more on mission in. Now, there may be multiple. I understand that you have one card. But maybe, you've got the church thing hammered out. You're good at coming to church on Sunday morning, but man, that coworker at work, I really need to work on them. You don't have to put the person's name on it. The only two names need to be on it. Yours and who you're going to bring along to help you. Maybe kids, it's at school, and you're going to bring your friend along with you who also believes in Jesus to work on that one kid that is just too hard to work on. Or maybe it's your extracurriculars that, football is great, but, when I get hit hard enough, man, the F-bomb is really easy to say. And you need to work on that. I don't know what that thing is, but write your name on it. And then, who is coming with you? That may be somebody who needs to hold you accountable. That may be somebody who has no clue what this Jesus thing is about. And just doing life. They need to learn alongside of you. You need to invite them to church. So, right, who's going to come with you and put it at the church pile? So we're going to play this song, and I want you to literally go put your yes on the table.